Great. I think we are live. I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds for everyone to join in. I can see the audience coming into the session now, but I'm just going to wait for a few more seconds for everyone to join in before starting the Q&A. Those of you who are already in, I can see some count already in to this session. So thank you for being on time. Just give us a few more seconds before we start the Q&A. I'm going to do a quick audio and video test on this. So if you're able to hear me clearly, can some of you say a yes in the chat box? So whether you're on YouTube or on LinkedIn or Facebook, just say a yes in the comments and we'll get to know that you're able to hear us clearly.
I would say if you add me, I'm just this is again a check for my audio. You can confirm that I am heard properly as well.
Awesome. We have a few confirmations coming already. Great. Great. We have enough confirmations. Great. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. It's a pleasure to see all of you. Since you have come into this session, which is on interview tips for the ISB interview, I'm assuming either you are YP applicants who have got a shortlist for the interview, or you are PGP applicants who have already applied in the round 1 and waiting to hear about your interview calls, or you may be looking to apply in round 2 or round 3 this year. So thank you for joining this session. We hope to make it interesting and informative for you. And for this, we have Mr. AM Kannan, the ex-admissions director of ISB, joining in for this Q&A. Thank you, Kannan sir. Thank you for taking out the time to do this session. You are a legend. You are a legend in ISB admissions. Everyone knows you. You have admitted so many students over the years, and I'm pretty sure that the insights that you give us today would be extremely insightful to everyone in the audience. So thank you again, and welcome again for joining this session.
Thank you very much.
Great. So let us start. And Kannan sir, the first thing which I want to ask you is that you were the admissions director for ISB for over 7 years, right? You ran admissions between 2007, late 2007 till middle of 2014.
Yes.
So really a long stint, and you must have possibly evaluated multiple thousands, admitted multiple thousands at ISB as well. How was that entire experience?
Oh, that experience was great. And honestly speaking, at some point in time, it felt like playing God. And I was not too comfortable doing that. Let me be very honest about it. And it is not a very easy thing to actually say no or not shortlist a person, because you found a lot of good people out there. And it is especially kind of disheartening, if you ask me, when there is this person on the bottom line, say yes, and you agonize over that. But then at some point in time, you have to take that call. So my approach to that was very simple. I would say at the time of shortlisting, you give the benefit of the doubt to the candidate and shortlist anyway, if you are on the borderline, and let the interview process take over. But at the final stage, it's the AdCom which takes the final decision. So you put up everything to the AdCom, which of course I was a very much integral part of as admission director. I was also a member of the AdCom. So we took a conscious decision at that point in time. And if I'm truth be told, the benefit of doubt at that point in time went to the school.
Fair. Okay. While you didn't want a deserving candidate to get rejected, at the same time, you didn't want anyone who's non-deserving to come into the class as well.
Exactly. So
a fine balance on both sides.
Very fine balance. That's a very fine balance, actually.
Fair. So let us understand this process, right? A lot of the people in the audience are those who have submitted their application in round 1 and are eagerly waiting for a decision. So round 1 deadline was 12th of September. We're on the 22nd. The interview invites have not yet started rolling out. So what is happening during this period? What happens once the application is submitted till the time the interview invite rolls out? So what takes place during this time?
Okay, typically the process is very, it depends on who ends up, there are at least 2 people who have to read your application. And
Okay.
the simple rule was, I mean, you make it into three categories, either say a yes or a no or a maybe. So both have to say yes, then it's a yes. If both the readers say no, it's a no. And it's while we do use the current students, the students don't take the final call. The students can at best give a recommendation, which is a yes or a no, but that has necessarily got to be ratified by somebody who's at least at the level of a assistant director or a associate director at the admissions team to either validate it or negate it. Because there have been instances where a yes from a student has been shot down for other reasons, and no from a student has been converted to a yes. That's happened. So, but one of the advantage of having students look at it is that it's thoroughly read beforehand. It makes our life that much easier when we then go through the application, because they have given detailed comments. So you ratify those comments and see, okay, fine, is that comment valid? Yes, no, and then take a final call. If the students don't see it, then at least two people from the admissions team would see it.
All right.
And
So
if
then
there
why
is
is it that?
and if
Sorry,
there is
please
a
go ahead.
and the final call, of course, I mean, if there is a type, there are two people who are not able to make up their minds, then those kind of files would then necessarily come to me as a as mission director to take a final call.
So basically, like a tiebreaker, the you again are playing
Exactly.
God in that particular scenario.
Exactly. Which is what at some point in time, you find it great doing it in the earlier years, but then over a period of time, you start getting it gets you.
It's a high pressure job in that
It is
sense.
a high pressure job in that sense. Yes.
Interesting. So, Kanan sir, very interestingly, we have seen candidates, right? And I know of alums, I'm one. And of course, I applied with a really high GMAT score, which was lucky for me. But we had batchmates who made it even with a 610, 620, 630 GMAT. And we all know of applicants who got rejected with a 750, 760, even 770 on the GMAT.
Yes.
So
Yes.
why
It
does
happens.
that happen? Why does that happen? Why does a
The
630
GMAT is
make it
only,
sometimes and
the
a
point
760
is,
doesn't?
see, the point is, there are what I would like to call the objective criteria and the subjective criteria. The objective criteria, of course, are the GMAT scores, the academic scores. Now, you would typically find that a person with a 770, 760 GMAT might have had a poor academic record, so which kind of does him or her in. Okay, on the contrary, somebody with a 610, 620, 630 GMAT might have a fabulous academic record. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that, you know, what we also used to do on a rough estimate, we used to find that about 70%, 70, 80%, over a period of time that kept changing. When I initially took over in 2007, and even earlier than that, I was part of the admissions in 2005. 2005, about 85% of the applications used to be engineers. Now,
Right.
typically, people from that kind of background have high GMAT scores. People with non-engineering backgrounds would have a much lower score. So it is unfair to kind of compare the 630 if he happens to be a non-engineer with an engineer who's got a high GMAT score, and this guy has got a high GMAT score, this guy has got a low GMAT score. Inherently, this is a cohort which is the non-engineers. They get a typical lower score. So in the application pool, you would find that we look at them differently. We would analyze,
All right.
assess their GMAT score in comparison to others in that same pool, which is the non-engineers, while the engineers would be compared with other engineers. And if you
Okay.
look at the average GMAT score of engineers, it would be well over in the application pool itself. It'll be kind of approaching 710 and 720. So expecting
All
that
right.
an engineer with even a 680 or a 650 would make it is going to be a bit tough.
All
Having
right.
said that,
So,
if the person has a very good academic background, we would kind of say that that GMAT score was an off day and give the benefit of the doubt
fair,
to the candidate.
fair. And also, does an outstanding profile offset a low GMAT score?
Not necessarily. These are two separate buckets as such. So, outstanding profile in what sense? So, you could have some outstanding performances in the workplace. Their career growth would have been very good, better than average, that kind of thing. So, when you're talking about profile, you're looking at what kind of work have they done? Have they done something different? Okay, and does the essays also reflect that kind of difference between them and the others? Number one, does the letter of recommendation talk about some outstanding work that they have done? And to a certain extent, while the letter of recommendation is confidential, the candidate is not expected to know it. That's a normal course. But invariably, they do know quite a bit of it. And let's talk about achievement. The letter of recommendation invariably comes from the boss. So
Fair.
when he says that this guy has done a fantastic job in a certain area or certain action or certain achievement, those also appear in the essay. So then there is some kind of a validation. But if this guy comes up with some entirely different stuff in the essays and this guy comes up with something quite different, then there is a little bit of a dichotomy there that, hey, how come the boss is talking about something else while this guy is talking about something else? So you
So
start reading
story needs to be consistent across the
consistent
application.
across the application. So that's important.
Interesting.
So the story needs to be consistent across, number one. And the that's important. And you start reading between the lines, Well, for instance, one of the questions that the LOR used to ask for is, how do you rate the person with relation to the peer group? And you would have answers like, he was definitely top 1%, top 5%, top 10%, top 20%. So now you start reading between the lines out there, because a guy who's definitely top 1% is not going to be called a top 20% by the boss. So the moment you
Right.
see a person who the boss says is top 20%, you know for a fact that he is less than 10. He
Yep.
can't be better than that. Okay. So
True.
if he's going to be top 5%, he's somewhere between top 5% and 1%. He's definitely not in that 1% bracket.
Fair.
Okay.
So it's
So
a judgment call.
it's a judgment call. At the same time, it's reading between the lines. I mean, you don't, the boss is he's the top 20%, but you start reading between the lines and say, hey, this guy is not going to be really that. So it's a judgment call. So there are a whole lot of such judgment calls across the board when you're reading essays, by the way.
So some quantitative parameters like your GMAT, GRE score, previous academics, those are quantitative. Profile, application, the essays, the LOR, these are the subjective parameters where
Subjective.
the reader takes a
Absolutely.
judgment call.
Absolutely.
Fair. And if I'm getting this correct, it's the combination of these two that decides whether the interview invite is given out or not.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Now
And
let's
it
look
takes
at
time.
what
By the way, it
happens.
takes time to go through all that. It's not something that you just skim through and
Of course,
there's a
thousands of
time to it.
applications
Oh, yes,
and that's
sure.
why this
Sure.
gap. That's why this gap between 12th of September deadline and interview invites coming 1 or 2 weeks later.
Absolutely.
This is the
Absolutely.
time which the admissions team is using to evaluate applications.
Absolutely. And by the way, in the
Perfect.
in the good old days, back in 2005, 2007, etc., uh, the application itself was not online. It used to be
Yeah.
offline, and the GMAT score would come separately by post. This application would come separately. So about a week would go by, to match these two itself. That itself used to take about a week's time because it had to be physically done. Now, of course, everything comes
True.
online and you press a button and the whole application is
Much.
available to you. So the
Right.
the deadline is done the next day. All the applications are available. In
Fair.
those days, about it used to take about a good 1 week before that used to happen. I
True.
lived through both
So
both years.
true. So, Kanan sir, let's look at this, right? Let's say the application has been evaluated. Now the person is shortlisted for an interview. Now, how is it decided who's going to conduct the interview? Is there a profile? So we know ISB interviews are alum interviews, right? I have done quite
Yes.
a few of those. There are alums who have done a lot of alums, right? Every year, hundreds of alums get involved in the whole
Yes,
exercise.
yes, yes, yes.
Now, how is this matching done? How is it decided that which candidate would be interviewed by which panel?
That's a different call. I mean, because to a large extent, that's extremely difficult to actually do that. Because it's, for instance, you're having interviews in Delhi. So the admissions team is not there physically present doing the interviews out there. There could be some people administrating. I used to be there. There used to be other senior people as well. In our time, it used to be two alums and one admissions person in every interview panel.
Now
Okay,
it's now it's mainly alums only. So now
it's
it's either
it's
two or three alums.
two or three alums now. Okay. Now, while there was a kind of an effort to make sure that at least these I mean people, let's say a chartered accountant, etc., etc. We try and find a chartered accountant in the panel to be there, but it's not possible all the time.
So while
So
it is possible that the panel may have someone similar to the candidate's profile, it's not always necessary.
it is not always necessary. Yes.
All right. So it is very much possible that there's let's say, purely marketing profile person being interviewed by a panel which has your alums with a tech background on
Oh,
it
yes.
or a finance background. So
Sure.
the questions can go anywhere on whatever they choose to pick in the profile.
The point is ultimately, which is why most of the questions would be centered around what is written in the application
All right.
to a large extent. Okay, unless the candidate himself decides to bring up something which is not there during the course of the interview, and then okay, here I am, I'm making this statement. Then he is opening up for some kind of a questioning along those lines. But otherwise, it's usually stuff that is straight out of the experience. And that I guess, but it doesn't make a difference whether there's a profile matching or not. You can still do it. Number one. And secondly, back then
True.
we used to have this practice of every alum who used to do interviews used to go through a 1 day interview skills workshop. And that was kind of mandatory. We said, unless a person goes through that workshop, he will not interview, period. So
True.
we had that workshop going every single year.
Okay. So, on what parameters are the candidates evaluated during the interview? So, you have this panel of alums who's there. Now, of course, they may have some training, but everyone may be asking different questions. So, finally, how's that reconciled? Every person would have a slightly different interview experience in spite of the alum
Finally,
training. What are the
absolutely,
parameters?
that's bound to happen. But ultimately, if you boil all of them down to some kind of set parameters which are mandatory, then you're good to go. It doesn't matter who interviews you.
So, if you're okay
So those
sharing,
kind
what
of
are
things.
those? What are those parameters?
In our times, it used to be typically, I mean, there are a couple of things which are absolutely uh, non-negotiable. One was the quality of an assessment of the quality of the work experience. That was definitely on top of the
Okay.
list of this thing. The quality of the communication skills. How good was a person communicating? So these two were absolutely non-negotiable. Apart from that, we used to typically look at some of the strengths of the candidate as they emerge from the reading of the things like leadership, team play, analytical skills, and there were three more, okay, which I don't recall at this point in time, but they were there, and we could pick up any two. And one of the things that we consciously avoided at that time was to harp on the weakness of the candidate. We never asked questions centered around the weakness. And in fact, the question is tell us something, biggest weakness, biggest strength was never something that was asked. So that was at that point, so long as I was an admissions director, a question asking, what is your weakness, three biggest weakness, was a no-no.
Fair. So
Okay.
interestingly, sorry. So
Yeah.
interestingly, by the way, to the audience who are listening to this, these ground rules which Kannan sir laid out during his time, right? Those are still valid. So those of you who don't know or who didn't get a chance to look up through my profile, I'm an alum from the class of 2012. Non-engineer fortunately made it. Savita Mahajan, who was the deputy dean at that time, interviewed me and admitted me after an 8-minute interview. So surprisingly, that did happen. But I worked with the admissions team between 2014 and 2017. And Kannan sir and I did overlap for a couple of months during that time. So he was just about leaving the admissions team as the admissions director in 2014, had just joined the admissions team to handle international recruitment and then, of course, run YLP plus PGP Pro admissions and all of that. But Kannan sir, very interestingly, the parameters that you defined, right, those are still being used. So till 2017, when I left admissions, at that time, those parameters were still being used. The format through which the alums give feedback, that changed slightly, but the communication skills, your analytical skills, your signs for leadership potential, those were still being evaluated through the interviews. So that was still happening even till 2017. And from what I know right now, that is still in use currently as well. So thank
So,
you. You were the architect of designing all of that. It's
yes,
still
I
you,
was.
like
I
what you did
certainly
10 years
was.
ago, that's still being on.
I certainly
Great,
was.
great.
And this all happened back in 2007, 8.
Okay. So
The
that tells
structure
us
was
that
that.
admission, so that tells us basically these school admission criteria don't change massively or fluctuate massively over years. You're broadly looking at similar kind of traits or attributes in the candidate as possibly you were looking at 5, 10, 15 years ago as well. You finally want
Absolutely.
that same
They-
quality of
See, drastic changes, in fact, are not desirable because then you don't know what you're looking for. You
true,
can't change
true.
these things year on year, you know. So there has to be some consistency. There has to be some method to this madness, if you might call it that. And that method comes in only if you have consistency. So,
And possibly it's worked as well. It's worked
and it
as well.
works.
That's why
See,
we've seen
ultimately,
so many successful alumni over the
the
years.
point is the proof of the pudding is eating, yeah, ultimately. So it has worked. We have got some great alums out there. And the process also ensures that you pick up some people who, in the normal course, you would have said, hey, this guy fit in. But no, we managed to pick those people.
Fair, fair. And that's why you see lawyers, doctors, fashion designers, sportsmen, so many different diverse backgrounds making it to the cohort because there was someone like you who was doing this right filtering even without with the low GMAT score, but the profile is good. Your profile brings value to the cohort. And these people, I had a very extremely enriching experience as a student. The batch had some really amazing people, and I think it's thanks to people like you who took that decision to get those people into the cohort.
Absolutely.
Kanan sir, moving to the actual interview now, right? So let's say the student, the candidate is in the room, or in this case now virtually, sitting in front of a panel, uh, looking at the computer screen and looking at the alumni panel. Now, what are the different categories or kinds of question can the person expect? Is there some theme, some specific areas where the questioning happens, or it could be anything and everything in the world that can be asked?
Frankly speaking, it will have to be centered around what is written in the application. And it could be any part of
Okay.
them. Okay. It could be the essays, it could be the CV as well. So we could pick up something about what his After all, for every role, the person can enter 3 achievements. So we can pick
Right.
up on one of those achievements which are very recent, okay, and say, can you take us through your experience? How did you do that?
All right.
What were your challenges? I mean, think questions like, what kind of challenges do you face in achieving this?
All
And
right.
a couple of other questions to get a deeper insight. It would be that in retrospect, you achieved everything, you finished that particular job, but in retrospect, do you think you could have done something better? So unless a
All
person
right.
really has done it and he's been there, he can't answer the second part of the question. It's going to be very difficult to say, uh, could you have done something better? I mean, those are some of the questions that I normally did ask. Could you have done something better? How could you have done better? What kind of challenges did you face? How did you come naysayers in the group, for instance? I mean, when you're most of people are they working in teams. Okay, I
Right.
mean, it doesn't matter. There are very very few jobs out there today where you're kind of out on your own. You are part of a team.
True.
So, and when you're part of a team, there are going to be naysayers. So,
True.
how do you overcome their objection? So, take us through that, and so on and so forth. So, it's basically something that is centered around, and of course, we invariably ended up with the career goals. So, how coherent are your career goals? So
Fair.
there is something about what they have done in the job. There is something about their other achievements, and then finally you come down to the end of the interview. You talk about the career goals, what they are, how, and essentially we're looking at how serious they are about their goals, and does it really make a difference to them? And one of the questions I could possibly ask, and I have done so, is okay, this is your career goal. Do you really need an MBA for that career goal?
So being able to defend all their choices, right? So basically
Yes.
a strong so if I could summarize this in this word, your motivation, intent, or need to pursue an MBA. So
Yes.
reasons for your specific reasons for wanting to pursue an MBA. Why do they want to do that? Then intent and motivation behind ISB. So why ISB? Okay, so that becomes critical and important. So that to evaluate if they're chosen applied to the school for specific reasons, if they have a strong reason to come to ISB, or is it just they're just going by the brand, the ranking, or something like that. So that evaluation, and then clarity on career goals.
Yes, I was more interested in the clarity on the career goals. The why ISB is a question. I mean, I wouldn't take it too seriously, frankly speaking, because a lot of people apply to
Okay,
ISB because it's a brand.
true,
And frankly speaking, to have a brand name on your CV is a good thing to do. Otherwise,
true,
there are dime a dozen MBA colleges out there. So why not choose one of them?
true.
If the aim is only to do an MBA, but that's not uh, in reality, that's not really true. You need an MBA, but you also need to do it in a college which is well known for its pedagogy and stuff like that. So, ISB.
So basically, clarity on career goals. So motivations to pursue an MBA. So reasons for wanting to pursue an
Yeah.
MBA, and clarity on the career goals. These become very important. Karan sir, if I remember correctly, right, there was this rule in the interview prep training which alumni used to get. The trainer used to talk about 1 inch wide, 10 inches deep. And what you mentioned about the what, how questions, right? You would ask follow on question, next layer of questions. So it's like peeling an onion in that case, right? You're digging deeper and deeper to find the genuine information. Is that correct? Is that the correct approach that
That's the
the
right
panel tries to
approach.
follow?
In fact, that is the right approach. See, a superficial answer is something that anybody can give off the cuff without
True.
even thinking. Okay, that first level answer is something that anybody would be able to answer. It's only when you start digging a little bit deeper
Deeper.
that you then start realizing that
Separating the chaff from the
the
wheat. Yep.
absolutely. I mean, I recall this instance where you know There was this person who claimed to be running an 8 million. I mean, it's an IT services company, so $8 million project.
Wow.
Okay,
Okay.
wow. So the first question I asked that person was it a fixed bid project or a time and T&M project?
Okay.
That first question itself stopped that person. So that itself told me that this person is not doing what he or she is
It's talking
claiming
about it.
is talking about. Okay, the first response itself, and then you're forced to take a stance. So they take a stance, and the subsequent question, all the answers were while they said fixed bid, all the subsequent answers were more related to a TM&M project than a fixed bid project. So immediately there is major dichotomy in the answers.
Okay.
So obviously, there was no choice but to rate that person,
Reject the
rather
person.
poorly reject the person. I
Okay.
mean, it has been positive. But at the same time, there are certain interview experiences which, frankly speaking, even today I regret it. Okay, for having rejected a person. Okay, excellent
Oh,
candidate. Okay, excellent candidate. By the way, beautiful essays, everything absolutely right there. A candidate from Hindustan Lever had joined the company as a management trainee. He was working in Garden Reach factory. Okay, and I interviewed him in Calcutta.
okay.
And being an ex-levers person myself, I have a fairly good idea, okay, as to what a management trainee really goes through in that company. Okay, so what I was expecting was somebody who's assured of himself, confident, everything. Okay, he knew his job reasonably well, but that day he was completely shaken. The first question, he was nervous. He couldn't. And at the end of the interview, I was kind of shocked. I mean, what's happening? This is not the typical management trainee that I know of. Okay,
Hmm.
so no choice. Given his performance in the interview that particular day, there was no way I could have given him a good rating, and I obviously
Okay.
did not. And if I remember right, I had Vijay Dalmia, one of the alums, who was again a senior chap who used to run his own industry, Dalmia Industries, by the way, uh, with me. And both of us concurred. They said, hey, this doesn't look like a levers guy at all.
Hmm.
And there was no choice but to rate him
Reject
poorly.
him.
Okay,
Okay.
so I happened to know his recommender. So much later, I kind of rang him up.
Hmm.
ये हो क्या गया?
Okay.
Okay,
Hmm.
because I was a close friend of his recommender, I was able to take the liberty of actually ringing him up.
Okay.
It transpired that now that guy had gone through a very rough patch with the workmen in Garden factory. And believe me,
Hmm.
workers in Garden Reach can give the best of people a tough time.
Okay.
So there was a background to it. He was kind of uh, shaken up, if at all, because of what
Okay.
happened in the factory, and therefore that kind of more or less explained the performance. But then anyway,
But
we were rating him on the basis of what actually happened that day,
that day.
and that day, and that did him in. But the better part of the news is that he actually ultimately he called me up, the candidate, later for a kind of a feedback. So I told him everything and then said, "You're free to reapply next year." But he said, "Sorry, I have got into Harvard Business School. So thank you very much."
Okay.
He's
So
one
you
guy
never
I
you
never got
never know where I reject.
can
Sorry.
go. And by the way,
True. True.
you never know why accepted candidate is not making it. There was this guy again. This was back in Must be 2013, if I recall right. Yeah, Mohali had started by then. So 2013. There was this guy visually impaired. He took the
Okay.
trouble of coming to Hyderabad
Hmm.
before he even applied. So he met me. He met a lot of faculty members. He sat through a class. He did all that prep work and had a look at the campus itself. He couldn't see anything, of course. So visually impaired guy. So the day after he met me, I kind of wrote a note to everybody, the dean, the deputy deans, the head of faculty, everybody, and said, "Here is a guy." And by the way, this guy is a chartered accountant working in KPMG at that point in time. So he checked every single good box there is in terms of capability, and he had a good GMAT score as well. So I said,
Okay.
this guy on merits, he's going to make it most likely. He's,
Right.
he's done his homework, done everything, and not even applied. He had not even applied then at that point in time, but I was sure he would. So I said,
Okay.
the campus needs to be made ready for somebody who's visually challenged. And the campus was
Okay.
made ready, by the way, in time.
Wow.
Okay. We took that initiative. He got the admission, but sad to say, he did not accept. And later, of course, I called him up and said, why? He said, I got an admission to Stanford University, which school's called.
Okay. So
So,
you never know where a reject may take you, and you never know where an admit may take you as well. So there are two sides to both. Karan sir, on this point, right? You said some candidates are you're super ready, very well prepared for the interview. There are times when you dig through things, and some candidates fall apart, are not able to defend their story, not able to stand up to that. So how should one go ahead and prepare for the interview? What can a candidate do between now, say after the application to the interview invite or after the interview invite to be best prepared for their interview?
the one thing I would definitely advise them is to go through their own applications from end to end. Hopefully, they have done it all
Okay.
themselves and not left it to
Hmm.
some consulted right through from this end to that and not knowing what they
Hmm.
have written. Because believe me, it's not funny getting into an interview and asking a question and said, hey, this is what I've said I have achieved, kind of a look on your face. Okay.
Okay.
You need to know exactly what you have written and you need to kind of defend that position. If you've written something, they
So,
say, jolly well
hmm.
defend it.
Okay. So know your story really well. That is
You need to
one
know
clear
your story. That's
takeaway.
the first takeaway.
Okay. What else can the person do to be best prepared?
And then be prepared to be probed a little bit deeper into every aspect of your profile. It's not just the superficial thing. Okay, I led
Okay.
a team of 8. Okay, they did. So there is going to be some questions around that. You say that's the highlight of your, uh, what is your leadership style? How do you resolve conflicts within the team? What if there is a difficult guy in the team who refuses to do what has been assigned to him and things like that? What are kind of actions? So, on the other hand, instead of asking questions like that, you could also ask a question like, have you reported a guy to your superior?
Okay.
Now, what was the reaction of
Fair.
the superior? Number one. And IT industry, another famous this thing. You could be a leader of a team and your teams is not sitting in the same place as you. Okay. And
Which is true in today's day and age of remote working that is happening every
remote,
day.
forget about remote working. Even when they were co-located, you would find that you are sitting in one place, your team is sitting in another office somewhere else. Happens
Fair.
all the in the IT industry. That happens all the time. And
True.
oddly enough, you would also find the situation where your boss is sitting where those guys are sitting, and they have better access to your boss than you do. How do you handle
Okay.
that kind of situation?
All right.
Okay.
So basically, be well prepared. There may be behave. So these are behavioral event-based questions, right? You're checking the
Absolutely.
person's
Absolutely.
behavior. You're checking the person's behavior in various situations. So be prepared for behavioral event-based questions. Is there a split between rough split between how many WHO, what, how did you do kind of questions and the behavioral event-based questions that may come up, or there could be any composition?
It could be any. Frankly speaking, it could be any, because you really
Okay,
can't do that. Because let's be honest about this. You have about 25, 30 minutes to do the interview.
true.
So it entirely depends on how long it takes and how engrossing the interview is when you are actually interviewing the person. If he's got a good story to
Okay.
tell, I might go with that story alone and forget about the rest.
Fair. So basically, preparation helps. So there are people you're like, so spend time reading through your application, understand every sentence that you've written,
Absolutely.
have clarity on career, have clarity on career goals, be prepared with various situations for the behavioral event-based questions.
Absolutely.
Is that
And
fair?
but the one thing I would advise people from not
Hmm.
absolutely no is sit down and prepare some 50, 60 odd questions and have an answer by rote for all of them. That doesn't work.
Okay.
Because
So don't be over prepared. Don't be over prepared and be a parrot over there, but don't even be
exactly.
under prepared.
Because if you do that, you will definitely come out as a parrot, and it shows.
Fair. Fair. All right. What about guesstimate? So ISB used to have a
This guy,
guesstimate
yes.
question come in very, very often. And what about the guesstimates? How should one go ahead tackling those in the interview?
You see, what are the guesstimate? It's essentially estimation of some parameter or the other. For instance, I have asked a question like, estimate the quantity of rice that is eaten in, let's say, a state of Telangana in a day.
Fair.
Okay, so what is the approach to all of that? Okay, the point is what you are trying to do there is to uh, gauge a person's capability to think in the abstract, because you don't
Okay.
have all the information to you. You have to kind of make some valid assumptions, and the interviewer might question those assumptions itself, and
Hmm.
basis those assumptions you finally come to a final answer. For instance, you can start, the starting point might be something like, say, the population of the state of Telangana so much, uh, average family size so much, so many families, blah 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 blah, and so and so, and primarily rice eating, and therefore this is the kind
Right.
of quantity that is eaten or something like that. Now, you need to kind of, how do you validate? Is there any way to validate that particular answer? Or there are, for instance, you
Okay.
multiply it by, I mean, you say this is the daily quantities, and that daily quantities, then you uh, estimate what will be the annual quantity, and then you suddenly realize that you are exceeding the rice production by about 10 times.
Of India.
Okay, all of India.
Fair.
So you then realize that you've gone wrong somewhere. So find out where.
So there needs to be some logic to the assumptions.
There
They
has
need
to
to
be some
be
logic to the
valid,
lesson. For instance, there was
and it could
one
be. Hmm.
same question. There was some people who started off straight away. I mean, in those days, of course, it was the combined Andhra Pradesh, as the combined state was
Hmm.
known, and there were very interesting approaches to that. And for instance, there was one person, if I recall right, his approach was fine. I mean, his how did he first started with estimating the population of Andhra Pradesh itself. He said the state of Andhra Pradesh has got some 39 or 40 seats in the Lok Sabha.
Okay.
Right? From there, he said the
Hmm.
534 seats all over India, Indian population so much. Therefore, the Andhra Pradesh population would be around this much. It is
Okay.
proportional. It's proportional. The number of seats
Hmm.
is proportional. So that's a fair
Okay.
enough way of arriving at the population of Andhra Pradesh, if you ask me. And then you then
Fair.
proceed in the same fashion. So I thought that was a very refreshing. I remember this because this is
approach.
how one. Uh,
That's very interesting because it's usually very difficult to know the population of every state, right? I mean,
yes,
how do you keep track? But that's an interesting approach and an interesting approach to solving that vague thing.
exactly. So that is a very good. I mean, at the end of the day, you could also validate. So when you arrive at this thing, you then say, okay, this is it. And then you validate by saying, this is the total quantity. That sounds very plausible, and so on.
Interesting. So to the audience who are in this session right now, I'm just gonna ask Karan sir one very last interesting question, and then I'm gonna open up this session for Q&A. So feel free to keep posting your questions in the comments, and I will surely come to those. We will have the last 10-15 minutes for the audience Q&A, and I'm gonna take those up immediately after this next question of mine. Now, Kanan sir, we spoke about the how the shortlisting happens. We spoke about how there may be variation. There's subjectivity in the shortlisting as well as a parameter, your quantitative plus qualitative parameters going into shortlisting. We spoke about how the interview takes place. Now, what happens once the interview is completed? How is the final decision taken? Is it just basis the interview? If you've done exceedingly well in the interview, are you guaranteed an admit? Or if you have a below average performance, or if you think you didn't do very well in the interview, you end up with a short reject. What happens once that interview is completed? How is the final
Okay.
admission decision taken?
The interviewer's job ends with rating you in the interview,
Okay.
which is a rating from excellent to below average. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent, very good, good, average, below average. So that's the kind of scale that you have. And on multiple parameters, on each of them, there is
All
communication
right.
skill, the overall, and the work experience, the overall interview performance, etc. On all these three. This then gets sent up to the admissions committee. Okay, one, you
Okay.
have the interview rating. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is already there. You know, the
Hmm.
GMAT score, the academic score, which are the quantitative parts of the application, that's already there.
Right.
With that also goes
Hmm.
independent to the admissions
Right.
committee, and you have the interview rating also going up to the admissions committee, and then the final call is then taken by the admissions committee as to whom to admit and whom not to admit. So
So
there's
it's a
no
combination of your GMAT theory, your academics, interview
academics,
performance, your
interview
profile combined is
profile,
what plays into it.
everything goes to them, and they take the final call. And it's a fairly
All right.
long drawn out meeting that goes on. I mean, I've known of a couple of years when meetings have gone on from 9 a.m. all the way up till 11 p.m. without a final decision, continued the next day, and then by next afternoon, we kind of came up with the final list. So that's possibly the longest meeting we've had. At
Okay.
other times, of course, there are certain years where things become relatively more straightforward. So it might not be, but anyway, that meeting is not going to be anything less than about 4 to 5 hours
All
before
right.
we get the final
So
call.
So you said there's a admissions committee, right? Now, who is on this committee? Because a lot of candidates confuse the all the admission officers to be on the admissions committee. They confuse all the alums to be on the admissions committee. They confuse all the application reviewers, the student reviewers who do application reviews. A lot of candidates think that they are also on the admissions committee. So
Certainly
who
not.
are these people who are
So
on the admissions committee?
it typically consists of about 6 to 7 people.
Okay.
In our time, it used to be the deputy dean of admissions, CAS, etc. The administrative head. He used to be the chair. The convener
Okay.
used to be the admissions director. So these two are definite. Okay.
Okay.
We should have definitely two to three faculty members
Hmm.
on the admissions committee, two alumni on the admissions committee. We till
Okay.
the year 2011, we used to have 2 current students also on the admissions committee. But then we dropped
That's not
that.
the case anymore. That's not the
It's
case
not the
anymore,
case.
right?
That's not the case. They were dropped in 2011.
All right. So
For
the
two
deputy
very
dean,
fundamental reasons. The current students rarely ever showed up for these meetings. So we said, I mean, if that's the kind of
okay,
seriousness with which you're taking it, you might as well not come. So we are
they
dropping
have a
you. I
lot to
mean,
do with it
there was a bit of a angst from the current
students,
student of that batch, but they said sorry. The
fair.
record shows that you guys
So
are never showed up. So sorry.
okay, so fair. So it's the deputy dean in charge of admissions who's there. There's the admissions director who's there. There's some 2, 3 faculty members who are there, and a couple of alumni. And I'm
Yes.
understanding some seniors, really senior
Very,
alumni from the
very
earlier
senior
classes on
alumni.
it.
Very, very senior alumni.
Okay.
From class of
So to the
2004,
audience,
2005, that kind.
so to the audience, if anyone tells you, you're like, if any recent alum or anyone misleads you saying that, hey, I am on the admissions committee of ISB, do remember that person is bluffing. That doesn't happen. So you need to understand that. So I was part of the admissions team, and I can tell you that I've never been part of the admissions committee, right? So I was the associate director of admissions, but not in the admissions committee. So you need to understand there's a difference, right? And there's this separation kept deliberately so that there's no conflict or biases that come in. So as the admissions associate director, I may interact with hundreds of students, meet them at fairs, meet them at info sessions, maybe do interviews, evaluate them and all of that. But I may not still be the final person taking a decision on their candidature. And this is deliberately kept that way so as to avoid any biases. So there is a separate independent committee made up of senior faculty, senior alumni, which takes the decision on your final candidature. On that note, let's open it up to the audience Q&A. Let me take up some questions from the audience and try addressing your queries as well. We have some 10 to 12 minutes available to do that. And I'll pick up a variety of questions to give a varied flavor to this Q&A. So Kannan sir, the first question I'm going to take up is from Siddharth, who's an ex-armed forces person. He's asking if they have a lesser chance of selection compared to someone with a corporate experience. So do armed forces background people, are they at a disadvantage compared to the people with a normal corporate job?
Every batch has had its share of armed forces personnel in the ISB. So I don't think per se there is a lesser chance. Yes, to the
Okay.
extent that they typically have a much lower GMAT score, they might be starting off at a slight disadvantage. But
Okay.
usually I found that whoever has been shortlisted, they do pretty very, very well in the interview stage. So that can kind of help. And then again, there are a lot of people from the NDA, etc. You wouldn't expect them to have a very high academic score either. Okay, because they have a lot of other
All
things
right.
to do other than academics also. So we give them that benefit of doubt. By the way, the anybody who's gone
All
into the
right.
NDA, and though technically speaking, their academic scores might be pretty low. Okay, but we used to say, okay, special case, treat them special.
All right. So, in fact, very interestingly, we had an admit with an armed forces person who worked with us last year, got through with 20 years of experience. So there are cases like that as well. Karan sir, there's one thing which is becoming a trend of late. I remember that in the your classes till 2013, 2014, there used to be a fair chunk of candidates with higher experience. But of late, over the last 4 or 5 years, we have been hearing that if you are someone with 8+ years of experience, then getting through and we have seen this. We have seen this with the applicants, the higher experienced candidates, finding it fairly difficult to crack ISB. So is that a myth? Is that genuinely happening? Or how are the senior profiles evaluated? What should someone with higher experience do if they want to get through?
You see, one of the things we used to definitely insist on, the person with like 12, 13 years of experience should have demonstrated leadership at some point in time.
Okay.
If nothing else. I mean, see, the point is, one would accept that those guys would typically have much lower GMAT scores. Frankly, they are not part of the in the academic regimen rigor at all. So suddenly one fine morning going and sitting and getting a GMAT score of 700 plus is going to be difficult. So typically all of them used to be ballparked around 650, 660 there in that region. So, and it doesn't
Okay.
matter whether you're an engineer or non-engineer, it's all there. Okay. So you
Right.
analyze all of them in that zone. That's fine. But having said that, somebody with 13 years experience, one would expect some serious leadership demonstrated. I mean, I'm not saying just the qualities, but demonstrated leadership at the workplace. And that is a must. So
All right.
not all of them really do that.
Okay. So that's where it becomes more selective. If they are not able
That
to show
becomes
that demonstrated
exactly,
leadership, then that.
exactly. That's where it
Okay.
becomes really selective because one would expect that. I mean, somebody
Hmm.
who's at that point in the thing. And the other thing is that, of course, this is never looked at the application stage. The fact of the matter is that they would be also be treated separately when it comes to placements.
The seniors executive club, the senior
Club.
executives
So
club,
they'll
which
be
is
very different
SEC.
because their expectations are different. Okay, and therefore
Right.
they cannot be clubbed with the average 5 years of experience and say, "Hey, please go and sit in an interview along with them." Doesn't make it
True.
just doesn't make sense. So
True. So that the I know the career services team has a separate focus on this group as well,
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
you're finding opportunities for them is more of a one-to-one process. There's one-to-one handholding rather than just looking
But in any
or rather than
case,
just with the normal process.
if you really go into the depth, you would find that on an average, the senior profiles, as you might call it, constitute just about 10% of the class. It's never more than that.
It's fallen off late. It's come down. In fact, now it's around 5 to 7% of the cohort is in the 8+ years experience group. So it's fallen
Mhm.
over the years as well. Kanan sir,
Okay.
on a similar count, your a different view on this. What about the younger applicants, your candidates with less than 3 years of work ex, 2 to 3 years of work ex? How do they stand out? What do they do to impress the interview panel and eventually impress the admissions committee enough to make it to the program?
Uh, you see, the younger people typically have, again, if you look at the other hard parameters, they would typically have much better GMAT scores. They would typically have much better academic scores as well, all fresh out of
Okay,
college, usually. Okay, so
right.
that's the norm. Okay, and they cannot have enough experience to actually show leadership. So expecting that is again, I mean, silly, if you ask my personal opinion. But
Okay,
they could have demonstrated a lot of other things that lead to leadership. The things like initiative.
all right.
Okay. So have they taken up something interesting at the workplace? Have they taken some initiative?
Okay.
What kind of initiative? And those kind of questions then get asked and then they get shortlisted. So the treatment of the application itself becomes quite different as compared to somebody who's at the other end, which is 10, 12, 13. You absolutely definitely need demonstrated leadership qualities. Here, you're going to look at more what are the kind of traits that which is where all these you would also typically find that all these so-called guesstimation estimation kind of questions get thrown at these guys because we are looking at somebody who can think through
So showcase
while
initiatives, the person should have. Yep.
and for instance, see, anybody would say 5 to 6 years of experience, which is the average, 4, 5, 6 years. They would have had sufficient stuff at the workplace to actually talk about it. These guys would not
Right.
have that as well. So your your best chance is to look at what have they done with the time that is available to them
Okay.
in terms of
So basically,
initiative.
if you are the lesser experienced candidate, then initiatives become critical. So basically, going beyond the call of duty, right? Besides the regular
Yes,
job,
Absolutely.
what additional projects you have done, what is that X factor that differentiates you from the hundreds of other applicants in the same bucket, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Kannan sir, I'm going to take up a question from Yashvardhan, who's posted this question on LinkedIn. He's asking, what should re-applicants keep in mind, right? You applied once, you didn't get through, you're trying your luck a second time or a third time. We know someone who tried fifth time, five times before making it. So you are a re-applicant, maybe applied multiple times or applied once before. What do you keep in mind while making your application? How do you stand apart?
Okay. One of the things I always say is that the first person a reapplicant is actually competing against is the person himself.
Fair.
Okay. That's my approach. The fact is that your profile has to be very, very different in that 1 year. If you're applying 1 or 2 years later, what has been the change, incremental change in your profile overall as compared to what it was last year? And
Okay.
if that has not changed, there's very little chance that you will even get interviewed.
So the reapplicant essay becomes critical. So what what has
Exactly,
changed in your
What
profile
has
since your
changed in
last
profile?
application
Yeah.
that
And
that
you
becomes
need not even
important?
focus about the GMAT score, that improvement in the GMAT score, because that becomes very evident to the person who gets the. We know you applied earlier with, say, let's say 660, now we are at 720. You don't have to highlight that in the essay, okay, because that's something that is already known. What you need to highlight
Okay.
is what are the other aspects of your application that you've changed significantly between the last application and now. Then
All right.
that's
Interesting.
the reapplicant essay, by and large.
Okay.
Okay, and
Fair.
it becomes critical.
All right.
So you are competing
So
against yourself in the first place.
fair. So show what your so Yash, the message to you is show what has improved. Why should you be given a second chance or a third chance, whatever, right? Whichever number of time you're reapplying. What has improved in your profile since your last application? That is something that needs to be highlighted. And of course, the rest of your essays, the story that you're presenting needs to be impressive as well overall. Uh, Karan sir, now let me talk about there are these niche groups, right? Someone is coming from the hospitality sector, someone is a lawyer, someone is a doctor, someone is a fashion designer. Do these profiles have an advantage over the other typical, let's say, engineering background people or people applying from the software industry, or even your normal BCom, BBA graduates are applying compared to those? Do these niche sectors like fashion design, law, architecture, sports, any of these, do they have an advantage?
I don't think they have a priori advantage just because they come from some niche profiles. They have to
Okay,
demonstrate that they bring value to the class ultimately.
all right.
Just because they are from the niche, this thing, it doesn't give them an automatic interview. It doesn't give them an automatic um, final call as well.
Okay,
You have to show in what way, what value, how are you different, number one. And what value have you brought to your current job, wherever it might be?
okay.
You might
And
be a
also,
graduate.
what value does the person bring to the classroom? They need to be able to answer what is that unique value that they would
See, the
bring if they're
point is,
admitted to the cohort.
diversity by itself is not a. What it does is your ability to think differently is what is so critical when it comes to
Okay,
the classroom discussion. Can you bring in nuances which are significantly different from what the others are saying?
all
The
right.
fact is, you would find that most engineers would think in a certain way. I mean, I'm an engineer myself, but truth be told, that one of the biggest unlearning you have to go through in a B school is the fact that there are no right answers. While engineers typically, you ask them, put them into a classroom, they would, at the end of a case discussion, say, "Sir, can you tell us what is the right answer?" I mean, you will find some guy or the other asking that question, at least in the initial
Fair.
days. Okay.
Fair.
And I've been on both sides. I've been, as a student, I've been sorely tempted to ask this question. And as a faculty member at one in B school, I've been asked this question: what's the right answer? But the fact, truth be told, there are no right answers. It's only right or wrong approaches
Fair.
to a problem. So you approach problems from different angles. So these people are able to approach a problem from a completely different angle. And therefore,
Fair.
to that extent, it enriches the class.
All right. So, to the audience who are listening, and I know we are beyond time, but I'm going to take 5 more minutes on this because it's a very interesting conversation. So, the message to you, if you're from your niche profile, a unique profile, do keep in mind that your profile by itself is not an advantage, but how you use that profile, what kind of value you would bring because of that profile to the classroom, is something you should aim to highlight in your application. That is what may help you get through to the program. Kannan, so on the same lines, right? So we spoke about niche profiles. I am 100% sure that a lot of people in the audience come from that typical tech background. So there's this
Oh, yes.
Indian IT male, right? So what does the Indian IT male do to stand out? How does the Indian IT male improve his chances to get through to the program?
Again, how have you differentiated
Kannan,
your
sorry.
how have you differentiated yourself from the run-of-the-mill tech person? Okay.
Okay.
And have you taken some initiatives? Have you taken something on the job which is significantly different from what the others are doing? And of course, it helps if you have a damn good GMAT score, if you have a very good academic score. Yes, all that is good. See, the fact of the matter is that uh, out of, let's say, 4,000 applications or 5,000 applications that they get, okay, about 1,500, 2,000 applications will be of this category. So how do you distinguish one from the other? Because all of them would have the very similar kind of career path, software engineer, software, then team lead, project lead, etc., etc., etc. So, in what way have you distinct yourself from the rest of the crowd? Is the question that has to be asked. And by the way,
Fair.
there are no easy answers to this one. Okay, and that's something that I grappled with all the years I was here. And that's a question that used to be thrown at me by other admissions director in USB schools as well. Hey, how do you make out between one engineer and the other? Because all of them seem to be doing the same thing. So will you please tell us?
Fair.
Actually, I've had that discussion with quite a number of them, and one
Hmm.
of the ways, of course, their approach is anyway. Their class is only 10% engineers, anyways. So they can just say blanket no to all of them. And some of them get that.
Right.
Well, I can't
Hmm.
afford to. Certainly not. You you have to give a fair chance to everybody.
All right. So if you are the engineer, right? The male, of course, male, female engineer, whatever. If you're from the dominant applicant pool like tech or you're with a tech background, then it's your initiatives, right? Because your work profile is not going to differentiate you. It's the initiatives. So what additional projects, or if you've taken on some really challenging assignments, then those plus your GMAT score, plus your academics and extracurriculars are your gateway to differentiating yourself from the crowd. So if you
Yeah.
can't stand apart on the work profile, look at these other factors and try to stand out over there. Karan sir, I'm gonna again. I see the audience interest is not dipping. In fact, the numbers are going up even in the very last minute. More and more people are joining this conversation. So I'm guessing we are at a very interesting juncture in the conversation. And again, I'm gonna ask a very interesting question on the score. So Spandan has asked this. Here he's asking for his profile, 4 years of experience in the hospitality sector. But let's remove the sector. Forget about the sector. But what is a good GMAT score? What is that safe GMAT score that someone should be
There,
looking at?
by the way, to my mind, there are no same GMAT scores.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's
Absolutely
Higher the better?
higher
Is
the
it right to
better
say
is
higher the
always
better?
true. Higher the better is always true. Let's leave
Okay.
it at that, because see, I have on my own. I mean, I've done it, because therefore a 770, 780 GMAT have been rejected without even calling for an interview.
True.
Because for the simple reason, there's this time, there's this attitude that I've got a 780, I'm God gives to any B school, so you have to call me. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a
Okay.
compelling set of essays. You should have to have a compelling set of achievements for you to be even standing a chance. And it doesn't matter whether you're from hospitality, engineering, YEWO, doesn't matter.
All right.
That doesn't matter at all. Okay. But at the
All
same
right.
time, there have been enough compelling things from people with as low as 620, 630 to warrant at least an interview call. It happened.
All right. So yeah, fair enough. And I will vouch for this. Over the years, we did see candidates with 610, 620, 630 also making it. And we have seen, the person was speaking about who applied the fifth time and got through actually had a GMAT score of 750. So 750 GMAT score got rejected. So the first two times he applied, he had a 710, 720, something like that. The last two times he applied before getting through, he had a 750, still got rejected. And then the fifth time when he applied, he finally made it. So there are cases like that as well where 750 may not be a guarantee of an admit. So don't go by that. Saurav, I can see your question. You are a you're a founding team member at a startup, 4 years of experience, 670 on the GMAT. Do you stand a chance? So from what Kannan sir said, yes, if your profile, if your story is compelling enough, you may make it with a 670, but there's no guarantee. It's about how strong your story is. Irrespective, a higher score helps. So if there's time to the round two deadline. December 5th is the deadline for round two. If you're able to improve your score before that, you very well do it. It does improve your chances. If not, you may attempt with a 670 and still make it. But again, no guarantees on that. It's a holistic evaluation of the whole profile that matters. Karan sir, on that note, I am going to wrap up this conversation. I do see a lot of questions coming in. I see a question from Divya asking, how do you explain value to the class? How are entrepreneurs evaluated? So Aina is an entrepreneur asking, how are entrepreneurs evaluated? So I know we are leaving a lot of questions unanswered, but in case these people want to get some insight, some guidance on your on their profile, or how do you what works for them, what doesn't work for them, can they write to us at ISB Mantra and we can take your inputs on that and give them feedback accordingly? Is that feasible?
Sure, that is definitely feasible. Uh,
Okay,
but typically, I don't do a profile evaluation. Something that I
fair.
never did as an admissions director. Something I'm not going to do now.
Fair.
Okay.
So, all right. So, to the audience, I know we are leaving a lot of your questions unanswered, and you're the 100 odd people plus people who are on this session right now, and I've been seeing those numbers. Usually, you see the numbers dip during the last half of the session, but those numbers have held up and, in fact, gone up in the last half an hour. So, I know the conversation has been really interesting. If you're looking for some guidance, right? So there are a lot of blogs which are available by e-GMAT. I'm showing some of them on the screen. So there's this 8-step guide to cracking the Indian School of Business. There are blogs on how to make your profile stand out if you're coming from the typical tech background. So there are tips for that also available. So there's this lot of content available on the e-GMAT blog. This has been written by a lot of experts, including people from our team. So you can refer to these blogs and get some insights over there. If you are looking for a profile evaluation, if you're looking for one-to-one feedback on your profile, your candidature, you can also write to us at ISB Mantra. So the email address is info@isbmantra.com. I'm going to post this into the chat box as well. So you can write to us over there and check out the ISB Mantra website for insights. So there are 100 plus profiles of ISB alumni listed over there. You can check those out as well and see if you find a profile which is matching yours, and you see if you stand a chance. If you have a similar trajectory, then that may give some insight. But if you are looking for a profile evaluation, want to get more of your questions answered, you can write to us at isbmantra.info@isbmantra.com, and we would be happy to answer your questions as well. On this parting note, those of you who have already applied in round 1, the interview invite should be out soon. So start preparing. The interviews are expected to go on till all the way till middle of November, or maybe even beyond that. So interview invites may come anytime, even as early as next week to as late as in November as well. So start preparing. Don't wait for the interview invite to come to start your preparation. It's always better to be prepared in advance and be ready for that invite. You'll get only 5 to 7 days between the interview invite and the actual interview. So make the most of this time before the interview invite to be prepared and be ready for the interview. It is a critical component of the evaluation. Those of you who are looking to apply in round 2 or round 3, ideally prioritize round 2. There are more spots available in round 1 and round 2, and round 3 has very few spots available. So it is better to apply in round 2. So do aim to apply by December 5th if you can. And if that is what you are doing, then get started on your application preparation from now itself. Don't wait till the last 5, 10, 15 days to start preparing your application. The application development does require a lot of thinking through to happen. So start preparing that application from now. The essay topics are available. The application portal is open. You can log in, see the application requirements, and start working on those from right now. And as I said, if you need any help with the application or your interview prep, you can reach out to us at ISBMantra, and our team would be happy to help you with that as well. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience for joining this session. It was a pleasure for me to host this session. And Kannan sir, thank you to you for taking out the time to do this session.
Most
These
welcome.
insights,
I had fun as well. Let's put it that way.
I'm sure. And thank you again for doing this. This has been extremely insightful. For those of you who may not know this, I was a student when Kannan sir was the admissions director. So he and his team were responsible for selecting me. And I'm fortunate that I could do that. So thank you again, Kannan sir. You have a great evening and all the best. Keep safe, keep healthy. Same to the audience. Keep safe, keep healthy, and all the best for your ISB journey. Take care. Good night.
Bye.